But I think that it's precisely this repression of authority in the sense of the ego's kind of following of a will that is not its own. It's the repression of this, I think, that causes it to blurt up in its shadow form. So that even though it seems counterintuitive, I think that if the reason we are repressing all this is in order to avoid more kind of religious crusades and more wars and authoritarianism, then I think that it precisely in order to avoid these kind of things, we need to not repress authority within us. Authority in the sense of the desire for authority, the enjoyment of it. Or, put in other words, to be more lunar. To not be so solar. Again, to be more lunar, more receptive to an external will, instead of our will being sort of directed towards the environment and towards everyone around us. As Jung says in the Red Book, I think that, right, he says that war, the only way to stop war is to confront the enemy within yourself. And that sounds so sort of cliche when said in simple terms like these. But I don't think it's a cliche that has been understood at all by our culture. And again, as I said in the other video, I have doubts as to whether it even can be understood by a mainstream solar culture. I wonder if maybe it's not something that, returning to Yogananda for a second, whether it's not something that can only be absorbed experientially, and that books and discussions about this topic will only be maps to guide you towards that experience. In a very generalizing sort of way, you could even say that the entirety of language, the entirety of the solar kind of world is a map that guides you towards the lunar. Right? Completing the sort of the conjunction that everything in this way, everything has this sort of meaning that points to something beyond itself, right? Symbolism, I suppose, right? A meaning that is using itself to suggest something that goes beyond it. And I think that thing that goes beyond it is experiential. Being in opposition to doing, for instance. And so I suppose when you're following like chains of synchronicities and things like that, I think it's taking you towards an experience. If meditation could be defined as like concentrating, then synchronicity and stuff like that keeps you alert. It really makes you sort of focus and concentrate. And that's why it's so stressful, because it doesn't let you relax. You're constantly on edge, aware of patterns. And even though that seems stressful, I think that it's a sort of a weird kind of shamanic meditation. Shamanic in that it's more sort of visceral, I suppose. It's a kind of visceral form of meditation that keeps you focused on the present moment. Magic, basically, right? In that it saturates the senses with all sorts of data so that it is focused. And yeah, I don't know, returning to the topic of God as a person, there is something about there is something just about the idea of a meta authority figure that I think that, contrary to how we tend to think about it, this idea itself, this, or as Jung would say, I suppose, this symbol itself, the symbol of a meta authority figure, is exactly what is it's like exactly what drives or can drive this sort of lunar kind of beingness, where you're not doing anything but simply being and absorbing. And yeah, I don't know. I think that it's kind of an interesting thing to think about or approach. Because as I said earlier, there seems to be like this Ouroboros loop between psychologizing and occultizing or something like that. And a way in which the occultizing phase gives reality to things external to the ego or internal, right? It gives reality to things that before weren't real, and therefore gives unreality to the ego. Gives reality to all these all the things that the ego had held to not be real. Therefore, it's sort of like a return of the repressed, but it's like a return of the repressed, where the repressed, despite it being a psychologizing concept, kind of bites its own tail. It's a concept that ends up being used to bring itself to life or something like that. Again, you somehow see this in Jung's Red Book as well. And you know, you don't even need to... I keep referencing the Red Book because it's useful, but in any form of active imagination, any sort of active imagination-y kind of process that a person can find themselves, where the way that things are modeled as unreal, this unreality gets used by the experience to lift itself up from its bootstraps somehow, in the way that, like, as Philip K. Dick says, divine messages end up being stored in the trash and in the junk. It's as if the fact that the divine has been thrown into the trash gets used by the divine. It makes use of that, even though that is a strategy that has tried to contain it or throw it away. It can't. It's like water or something that just always finds a way to slip through the cracks. No matter how deeply you put it in jail or repress it, it will use that jail to free itself. It won't walk out of jail. It will use the jail itself as the method for its liberation. Yeah, anyway. Enough, I suppose.